Today we're talking about a book that can help you become a genius. From a young age, we've been bombarded with countless stories of genius by our parents and teachers. Newton, Einstein, Gauss, Da Vinci, Mozart, Marie Curie. These people were not only incredibly talented but also exceptionally hardworking, making us both envious and ashamed. We often tell ourselves we don't have that kind of talent, while our parents insist we just aren't trying hard enough. However, the author of this book discovered that excellence is not an innate talent, but a skill anyone can learn. The key to becoming extraordinary is deliberate practice. If you truly want to be a genius, applying the principles in this book will undoubtedly get you there. Regardless of your age, even as an adult, you can still become exceptional in any field. This book is called Peak: Secrets from the New Science of Expertise. Through today's video, you'll learn to look at natural ability and talent in the right way, understand the concept and characteristics of deliberate practice, and learn how to apply its principles. Hello everyone, welcome to our channel, which focuses on sharing the essence of great books. We share at least 3 great books every week, so make sure to subscribe to our channel. We've organized the full transcript into a document that you can download for free through the link below the video. Now, let's dive into today's sharing. A lot of people think geniuses are born, not made. Take Mozart, for example. He composed music at age 4 and performed at age 6, touring around and impressing everyone. He even had what's called perfect pitch, which means he could tell exactly which notes were right or wrong, whether it was A-flat or B-flat. But this book debunks all the myths about geniuses. You should know that Mozart wasn't born with perfect pitch. His father, a composer himself, devoted himself full-time to training Mozart from a very young age. While he had some success with Mozart's older siblings, it wasn't quite the same. But with the experience he gained, he poured everything into young Mozart, which is what ultimately made him the greatest. What about Paganini? He's famously remembered for a performance where he broke one violin string, then another, and yet another, until he had only one string left, still playing flawlessly, even as his fingers bled from the strain. Many assumed this was raw talent, but as the author discovered, Paganini had carefully trained for this. While pursuing a woman, he composed a piece with only 2 strings to create a duet effect. This inspired him to experiment with one-string compositions, and he perfected the technique over time. When he performed his famous piece with broken strings, he intentionally snapped 3 strings in succession, using his mastery to complete the performance. This genius moment was the result of intense practice and planning, not some mystical talent. People often mention Malcolm Gladwell's Outliers, which popularized the 10,000-hour rule with a simplified idea that anyone could master a skill after 10,000 hours. This book argues that Gladwell's take was overly simplistic. Gladwell's bestseller drew from research by Anders Ericsson and Robert Poole, who actually show that expertise requires more than just time. It requires specific, focused, and challenging practice. Think about it. If the 10,000-hour rule were universally true, a security guard who has watched doors for decades should be an expert. Or a disengaged teacher with tens of thousands of hours in the classroom should be an outstanding educator. But simply putting in hours without focused effort won't lead to mastery. In reality, some skills don't need 10,000 hours. Dedicated practice of even a few hundred hours can lead to breakthroughs. On the other hand, unengaged practice won't lead to mastery no matter the hours logged. The 10,000-hour rule is too simplistic. Instead, let's look at what deliberate practice truly involves. Here's an interesting experiment. Back in the 80s and 90s, this author hired a college student part-time for a unique task. Each week, they practiced a single project, memorizing numbers. They'd recite a long series of random numbers, and the student would challenge himself to remember as many as he could. Imagine this. If I randomly recite 7 or 8 numbers, could you remember them? Most people can handle around 7, which is considered normal. A bit above average might be remembering a phone number, about 11 digits. When this student started, he hit a roadblock at 8 digits and couldn't go beyond that. But each week, they practiced for an hour, aiming to break that 8-digit ceiling. After about 2 years of training, roughly 1 hour a week, over 100 sessions, guess what happened? The student was able to recall a sequence of 82 numbers with ease. He wasn't exceptionally gifted, just an ordinary person with no inherent talent for memory. Later, they shared this method widely, and people found that with regular training, many could memorize impressively long strings of numbers. Now, there's a young competitor from China who can recall over 300 numbers in sequence, completely accurate without missing a single one. This approach combines method and deliberate practice. This challenges our understanding of genius. People with extraordinary memories aren't necessarily born with that ability. They trained for it. As people push their limits, they continue to achieve breakthroughs. Here's some data that might surprise you. In 1908, there was a marathon dubbed the greatest race of the 20th century. A runner named Hayes not only won, but set a record at 2 hours, 55 minutes, and 18 seconds. Fast forward to today, the world record has dropped to 2 hours, 2 minutes, and 57 seconds, almost an hour's improvement. And if you're a man aged 18 to 34 wanting to qualify for the Boston Marathon, you need to finish under 3 hours and 5 minutes, meaning the 1908 record would only just make today's qualifying time. In diving, there was a time when attempting a double flip entry was seen as extremely risky, even resulting in injuries. People advised against trying it, saying it pushed human limits. But now, especially with Chinese divers, what once seemed impossible is standard. Humans consistently exceed their limits. Let's talk about memorizing pi. In Life of Pi, there's a scene where someone memorizes pi. In 1973, Richard Spencer set a record by memorizing 501 decimal places. A lot, right? Later, American David Shakel broke it with 10,000 digits. Even more astounding, an Indian named Meena memorized 70,000 decimal places, verified. Then Japanese Akira Haraguchi claimed an incredible 100,000 digits. It's shocking, but when you compare this with the push-up records, it's not as unimaginable. If you can do 100 push-ups, that's impressive. But in 1980, a Japanese man set a record of 10,507 consecutive push-ups. Guinness eventually stopped tracking because it took too long to verify. They later accepted only 24-hour push-up records, with an American doing 46,001 push-ups in 21 hours and 21 minutes in 1993. I'm sharing these numbers to show that human limits are constantly challenged. From memorizing numbers to push-ups and diving, the limits of both mind and body are continuously pushed. Why do humans constantly exceed their boundaries? The reason lies in our brain's incredible adaptability. One great example is London's cab drivers. London streets are notoriously difficult to navigate, and GPS doesn't help much. Taxi drivers in London must pass a rigorous exam, memorizing countless obscure routes. After passing, these drivers can earn a good income. So many work hard to qualify. Psychologists scanned the brains of licensed London cab drivers and found a surprising result. Compared to bus drivers who follow fixed routes and average people, these cab drivers had a much larger posterior hippocampus. This demonstrates that our brains continue to grow and adapt through training. So if you're willing to challenge and train yourself, you too can surpass those who came before. This brings us to the concept of deliberate practice. So, what exactly is deliberate practice, and how is it different from regular practice? The first major distinction is having a clear, measurable goal. Everything you do should be goal-oriented, and it's best if this goal can be quantified. That's why things like diving, chess, memorizing numbers, or doing push-ups lend themselves well to deliberate practice. They're easy to measure, with specific standards. Each practice session should have a clear objective. The second key is focus. There's an amusing story about Benjamin Franklin, a famous American writer and scientist. Remember, he was one of the earliest geniuses and the man who brought electricity to Earth by flying a kite in a storm. Besides writing and science, Franklin loved chess and played thousands of hours, yet he never became a top player. Here was someone brilliant, frustrated that he couldn't reach an elite level in chess. Why? The reason is that Franklin never engaged in deliberate practice with chess. He treated it as a leisure activity. He played casually with friends and never sought a stronger opponent to coach him. He didn't analyze each game or track his progress, but just kept playing as a hobby. It's similar to how we might play cards or mahjong every day, but still never become a professional gambler. However, Franklin did become a master at writing. And how? Through deliberate practice. Growing up without many educational resources, he was determined to improve his writing. His method was to find a magazine he admired, read an article, then set it aside and try to rewrite it from memory. He'd then compare his version to the original, noting where he missed a section or used the wrong words. This is deliberate practice, setting goals, practicing regularly, getting feedback, and making adjustments. That's how Franklin mastered writing. Malcolm Gladwell, in Outliers, uses the Beatles as an example, claiming they became elite musicians because they performed over 10,000 shows. The author of the book disagrees, pointing out that simply performing thousands of hours doesn't guarantee improvement. In fact, it could lead to decline from exhaustion. During these performances, the Beatles weren't practicing deliberately. They were enjoying themselves, improvising without focusing on skill improvement. Early on, they may have even performed better than they did later on. So, how did the Beatles become great? By focusing on songwriting. Their vocal techniques and methods weren't dramatically different from other singers, but their songs were more appealing. Their deliberate practice was in songwriting. They spent endless hours refining lyrics and studying melodies. That's where their deliberate practice and success was rooted. When we understand how adaptable our brains are, it's clear we can consistently push ourselves out of our comfort zones. Deliberate practice requires 3 things. First, clear goals. Second, focused attention, not just playing around like Franklin did with chess. And third, challenging yourself by stepping out of your comfort zone. Each practice session should be slightly different from the last, and feedback is crucial. After reading this book, I finally understood why weighing yourself is an essential principle in weight loss. I used to wonder, what's the point of having a scale for weight loss? It's about feedback. When you're trying to lose weight, check daily to see if you've made progress. If you've lost weight, figure out why. If you haven't, assess the cause and keep adjusting. This is the basic framework of deliberate practice. A crucial concept to understand here is mental representation. This term may sound technical, but after reading the book, I interpret it as the automatic response or reflex you develop to a concept or action. For example, when you see a dog, you don't analyze its characteristics based on scientific taxonomy. You simply recognize it as a dog. This indicates that your mind has a mental representation of a dog, so no conscious effort is required. A more relatable example is typing. Think about it. If you pause and try to recall where the A, O, or N keys are, you might struggle. But when you start typing, it flows naturally. Your fingers instinctively know where each key is without conscious thought. This is mental representation, a reflexive response built from experience. Remember that time Argentina scored a goal in the World Cup with a sequence of 17 consecutive passes without the opposing team even touching the ball? It was classic. How did they play so well? It wasn't about conscious decisions, awareness, or positioning. That's the level of expectation usually placed on amateur teams. Argentina had trained until their movements became completely automatic. I've read books on this approach where coaches insist, don't overthink it. When the ball comes, just kick it where it needs to go. When players reach this level of instinctive response, it means they've developed a complete mental representation of the game. This is why there's a huge difference between how we amateurs watch soccer and how professional commentators do. When we watch, we sometimes think, is this guy really that knowledgeable? The way they describe positioning and movement sounds almost over the top. But because they've played or studied the game deeply, they have a complete mental representation, so their commentary reflects what they genuinely see on the field. For us amateurs, lacking such mental representation, we might just notice the player's looks or how cool a move was. This is the classic spectators see the spectacle, insiders see the essence. Their robust mental representation allows professionals to notice things we miss. One fascinating example of mental representation in action is blindfold chess. Some grandmasters can play against over 100 opponents simultaneously, blindfolded. They don't even look at the board. They walk around responding to moves called out to them. It's mind-boggling. They keep all those chessboards in their head and remember every position and strategy without seeing them. For chess grandmasters, blindfold chess isn't an unusual challenge because their mental representation of the board is so complete. When they see a configuration, they don't just memorize pieces, they foresee entire strategies and potential outcomes. Many assume they have exceptional memory, but it's their mental representation that makes it possible. In one study, researchers tested this by asking both grandmasters and regular people to remember the positions of randomly arranged chess pieces. Surprisingly, the grandmaster's memory was nearly the same as the average person's. They couldn't recall randomly placed pieces well at all. This is because those random arrangements didn't fit their mental representation, so they couldn't intuitively respond. Understanding mental representation clarifies the goal of training, to develop automatic responses where you act instinctively due to a robust mental representation. Even physical skills, like a high-difficulty dive, rely on mental representation. The diver has an internalized sense of each muscle's movement and every bodily adjustment needed. They don't recite mental cues to control their body mid-dive. They just act. Thinking about this, I've realized that for some tasks, I too have a strong mental representation. For example, when I get a new book, I can quickly understand its structure, where each part fits, and what needs to be emphasized. My routine of reviewing a book every week is essentially deliberate practice, especially when I try to improve a bit each time. This habit continuously strengthens my ability to practice deliberately in my work. Driving also follows this pattern. New drivers need detailed instructions and focus on every move. Experienced drivers, on the other hand, start the car and go without thinking much. They're operating under their mental representation. The goal of training is to develop a range of these reflexive mental representations so that you can act proficiently and instinctively. How do you build such a mental representation? The author explored this by studying violin students in Germany, dividing them into 3 groups: good, great, and elite. Violin is one of the hardest instruments to learn because it lacks visual cues like frets or keys. Playing it requires precise finger positioning based purely on feel. Researchers analyzed these students' training histories and found one common factor: deliberate practice. The main difference among the 3 groups was the total hours of practice by age 18. Good players averaged 3,420 hours. Great players averaged 5,301 hours, and elite players averaged 7,401 hours. The gap of over 2,000 hours shows a direct connection between the amount of deliberate practice and ultimate mastery. Have you ever seen the movie Aquila and the Bee? It's a story about a young African-American girl and her African-American coach. This girl starts with an average vocabulary, not particularly bright or special. But through her coach's relentless and structured practice, she eventually memorizes an enormous number of words, mastering even the most obscure and difficult terms by the time she reaches the final rounds. This is a perfect example of deliberate training for the brain. The difference between being good, great, and exceptional often comes down to time invested, which relates to Malcolm Gladwell's 10,000-hour rule. But it's more nuanced. Not everything requires 10,000 hours to master, and not all skills necessarily take that much time to reach a professional level. Take ballet, for example. Dancers who train intensely from a young age, logging over 10,000 hours by the time they're 20, are likely to become ballet masters. But why does this author push back on the 10,000-hour rule? Because it can lead to 3 misunderstandings. First, You can't promise that 10,000 hours will guarantee success in every field. I once heard a real estate agent say, "I'm close to reaching my 10,000 hours in selling houses. That should make me an expert." The reality is that not every field guarantees expertise after 10,000 hours. Second, sometimes 10,000 hours aren't necessary. Hearing that number can intimidate people and cause them to give up. Think about Steve, who memorized 82 numbers after only 200, 300 hours of training. If we assume that everything needs 10,000 hours, it could discourage people from trying when, often, a few hundred hours can yield incredible results. The third misconception is that reaching 10,000 hours won't necessarily make you an expert. This is where we see the difference between popular science books and academic books. Peak. Secrets from the New Science of Expertise falls into the academic category. It's detailed and precise, even if it could become popular. Meanwhile, Gladwell's books are classic bestsellers with digestible ideas. His books simplify ideas for accessibility, sometimes sacrificing a bit of rigor in the process. Now we know more about how to become exceptional. So, how can we apply this in real life? First, bring deliberate practice into your work. Remember the movie Top Gun? Many younger folks today might not know it, but it was Tom Cruise's breakout role. He was young, riding motorcycles, flying jets, and chasing romance. Top Gun isn't just a movie. It's based on the U.S. Navy's real fighter training program. During the Vietnam War, at first, U.S. pilots could take on 2 enemy planes with just one of theirs. But as the war progressed, the Vietnamese got better, especially with Soviet MiG aircraft and training, until it was almost an even match. To regain their edge, the U.S. created the Top Gun School, where elite instructors played the role of enemy pilots, pushing trainees to their limits and putting them through high-risk drills that sometimes even ended in real crashes. The Top Gun training method was controversial, but they reviewed each close call, learned from it, and kept raising the bar. With each batch of trainees, the instructors themselves improved, making the training ever more challenging. Eventually, when they went back to combat, U.S. pilots could take down 5 Vietnamese planes for every one of theirs, sometimes achieving victory without a single loss. This Top Gun training method is a form of deliberate practice. How can you apply it at work? Treat every task as a training session. Take making a PowerPoint, for example. Reporting to your boss via PPT is a common task, one that might feel repetitive and dull. But have you considered mastering PowerPoint as a craft? Could you work toward becoming a true pro at both creating and presenting PPTs? With each project, set the goal to improve, even just a little. Over time, this deliberate approach will turn you into a master of the skill. Personally, the practice I enjoy the most is public speaking. I speak regularly, often to audiences of over 1,000. At first, I would feel nervous before going on stage, and sometimes even felt like I was trying too hard to please the audience, which was exhausting. I would finish feeling drained from the effort of trying to win them over. So, I challenged myself to build a stronger mindset. Could I go on stage and speak without putting so much force into it? Think about how top singers perform effortlessly. I once sang with some professional singers, and they were amazing. They held the mic with ease, and their voices sounded great. As amateurs, we tend to press into the mic, trying too hard. Professionals, though, stay relaxed. That's true skill. I wondered if I could approach public speaking in the same way, speaking calmly but effectively, like a pro. Recently, I've noticed that my heart rate doesn't even go up before stepping on stage. I go up there and start speaking at a calm, steady pace. My next challenge is to see if I can keep this relaxed style and still make the audience laugh and engage even more. It's all about setting one goal after another. When you see work as practice, you can avoid 3 common misconceptions. What are these misconceptions? They're exactly the 3 ideas this book aims to challenge. The first misconception is the belief in genetic limits. Some people think great speakers are born with good genes. That's not true. Many successful speakers I know didn't start with a natural talent. Some of the best debaters I've met even struggled with stuttering as kids. They improved by training, practicing in front of a mirror to overcome their speech challenges, ultimately winning debate championships. So, overcoming genetic limitations is the first step. The second misconception is that enough time will get you there. Many believe that with enough time, they'll become skilled. That's something we need to challenge. The third misconception is the belief that sheer effort alone will make you a master. Not necessarily. Hard work alone isn't always enough. You need a method, a deliberate practice approach. This means getting regular feedback each time you practice. A simple way to remember deliberate practice is the 3F rule. The first F is for focus. You must focus intensely on what you're doing. There's a story about a golfer who was practicing when his coach asked him what he was doing. "I'm practicing, trying to get better," he replied. The coach responded, "No, you're not practicing. You're just playing." He wasn't paying focused attention to his actions, wasn't critically thinking about his form or technique, and wasn't refining his mental representation. You know how Tiger Woods, after winning countless trophies, decided to start from scratch and relearn his swing? That's deliberate practice. He saw room for improvement even as a champion and committed to refining his technique. The difference between how professionals practice and how amateurs do is that professionals aren't doing it for fun. When we play basketball for fun, we laugh, we high-five. It's entertainment. That's not deliberate practice. Kobe Bryant once said, "You haven't seen LA at 4 a.m. He'd be out practicing shots at that hour, repeating the same moves over and over. Deliberate practice is repetitive and even boring, but it's what separates us from the average. If you see everything as just for fun, you'll relax but won't excel. To become exceptional, the first thing you need is focus. The second F is feedback. Find someone to give you honest feedback, tell you what you're doing well and what you can improve. The most effective way to do this is with a personal coach. There's a story of a 70-year-old man who wanted to learn karate after watching his grandson excel. He asked the author, an expert in deliberate practice, if he could still earn a black belt at his age. They set up a plan, which included a personal coach since group classes weren't ideal for him. This coach worked with him closely, correcting him and assigning practice drills. This man practiced for about 5 hours a day and, by age 75, achieved his blue belt. At this pace, he might reach a black belt by age 80. Another example, a 36-year-old man approached the author, saying he wanted to become a pro golfer. The author asked, "Have you ever played golf?" "No," he replied. "Have you played any sport?" "No, none." Here was a person who'd never played sports, yet he wanted to go pro in golf in his 30s. But they decided to give it a try, hired a professional coach, and he committed to intensive practice. Giving up everything else, he started to improve remarkably in a short period, all thanks to the power of deliberate practice. If you're serious about deliberate practice, you can accomplish amazing things. Let's say you want to master a foreign language. You can't rely solely on passive activities like listening to music or looking at flashcards during your commute. Set clear goals, and ideally, work with a coach who can give you precise feedback. The third principle of deliberate practice is called fix it. What does fix it mean? It means that when you identify a problem, you address it. The purpose of feedback is to reveal the gaps in your performance. Once you know your weaknesses, you work on improving them. It reminds me of when I was in college and spent a lot of time practicing ping pong. Though an amateur, I took it seriously. In high school, I'd only played for fun, just friendly matches every time. Have you noticed how amateur players love to compete? It's all about matches, and more matches. But when I started college, I encountered actual pros and I realized how outmatched I was. Losing 20-0 was a real possibility. Then, after watching them, I understood. A professional pointed out that each one of my moves had minor issues. Each movement was just a little off, so of course I couldn't keep up. Their solution? Take one aspect at a time. For instance, we'd spend an entire afternoon practicing just the forehand topspin, nothing else. We drilled it until pulling off a perfect forehand topspin became second nature. Once that was in place, we'd move on to the backhand block. That was deliberate practice. It was repetitive and honestly boring. Matches are fun because you can score points, see progress, and hear people cheering. Practice is just drilling, but practice is what truly helps you improve. I can still picture us out there on the court, hitting balls as night fell. Have you seen videos of Ai Fukuhara's training? Look them up. They're incredible. Her mother would tell her, "Today we'll hit 1,000 balls in a row." They'd go back and forth non-stop 1,000 times. If she missed, they'd start over. She'd cry, hitting ball after ball with tears in her eyes, but she had to hit 1,000 in a row. That's Fix It, training to eliminate your weaknesses. There's also a video of Liu Guoliang coaching Zhang Jiki, and it's intense, like watching a machine in action. Liu serves at lightning speed, almost too fast for the eye, firing balls across the table, while Zhang Jike rallies, perfectly matching the rhythm. After a whole bucket of balls, Zhang is completely out of breath. Liu's response? "This speed is acceptable." That's professional level practice. So, that's the 3F principle. Focus, feedback, and fix it. Start with focus, then get feedback from an expert, and finally fix your weaknesses by challenging your comfort zone. You can apply deliberate practice to your work and make it a place for growth. Imagine going to work each day with a mindset of deliberate practice, constantly aiming to become your best self. You can apply deliberate practice to your personal life too. The first step is finding a mentor, someone you respect who's genuinely skilled in the area you want to improve. Research their background, find out what previous students have said, and check their accolades. Once you find someone qualified, ask them to guide you. Just a set amount of time weekly can make a difference. What if you don't have a mentor? Here's a story. There was a clown who performed small intermission acts at a circus, telling jokes to keep the crowd entertained between the main acts. But during intermission, people usually went to buy snacks or chat, barely paying attention to him. He felt unappreciated, but wanted to become a master at telling jokes. So, he started practicing on the street, stopping random strangers for a quick chat. People on the street didn't want to talk to him. They were all in a hurry. He would time each interaction, noting how long he could hold someone's attention. He repeated this, trying to get just a few seconds longer with each person, refining his storytelling and people skills. His mentor? A stopwatch. The stopwatch gave him feedback. When he couldn't get a mentor, he relied on timed self-feedback, charting his progress to see if he was improving. We've all set resolutions before. This year I'll learn to swim, or I'll get fit, or I'll master guitar. The author observed an interesting pattern. In early spring, there's always a surge of second-hand guitars for sale. People buy guitars in the new year, inspired by resolutions, but by spring, they're ready to give up. That's the best time to buy a second-hand guitar. They're all nearly brand new. Health clubs, too, are filled with unused memberships by spring. Many people struggle to get past the plateau phase, that point when progress feels stagnant. At first, learning guitar is exciting, and you feel thrilled to play a tune. But once you reach that initial goal, you realize how far you still are from professional-level skill. That's the plateau phase. The plateau from amateur to professional can be challenging, and during this time, you must learn to sustain motivation. What does sustaining motivation mean? Let's think about how top performers stick to their goals and excel. You might think the answer is willpower, that they have an extraordinary amount of it. But in reality, there's no such thing as universal willpower. A person may be highly determined in one area, yet show no extra willpower in another. So, willpower isn't an all-encompassing trait people carry. True willpower comes from motivation. When we have solid internal and external motivations, we keep going. So, if you want to break through plateaus in life, you need to learn how to maintain motivation. The most effective strategies include creating habits. For example, a writer's habit is to write every day. One famous screenwriter advised that to learn screenwriting, you should copy scripts. Watch a movie. Narrate the entire script out loud, following the format. If you can repeat this for dozens of films, you'll begin to internalize the script writing process and eventually write your own. Developing a habit, dedicating an hour a week or an hour a day, is crucial for progress. Another strategy is seeking external support. External support can push you to grow. Take Benjamin Franklin, for instance. He set up a club where members would meet weekly to present their latest discoveries. Every person had to share something new they'd learned. Only top people were allowed to join, which kept the standards high. In this setup, you couldn't slack off because others were always encouraging you to improve. I encourage everyone to set up their own club. It doesn't have to grow large. 6 or 7 people is plenty. Meet weekly or monthly and have a set agenda. Discuss your progress. What did you learn this month? What's different from last time? This will help each of us expand our comfort zones and become more skilled. It's also helpful to seek external motivation. For instance, if you want to work on fitness, put a big photo of a bodybuilder or fit athlete on your wall. This visual reminder boosts internal motivation. That's why people who are dieting often look at pictures of people with their ideal body type. Find external motivators and use various methods to maintain motivation to stay on track with deliberate practice in life. Anyone who moves from deliberate practice to expertise goes through 4 stages. First is developing interest. Kids don't start out loving chess or violin. Their parents introduce them to it, allowing the possibility for interest to form. So, the first stage is creating interest, getting them to enjoy it. The second stage is becoming serious. For example, my daughter Dudu has been learning Taekwondo, and as she progressed to the blue-red belt, a relatively high level, she became more serious about it. Now, she feels the need to attend training weekly and deliberately work on her kicks and spins. This is the getting serious stage, where practice becomes regular and disciplined. The third stage is full commitment. This stage involves setting aside other things to focus exclusively on the activity, whether for a month, a quarter, or even a year. Like professional athletes or chess players working toward a ranking, this is the stage that can make you an expert. The fourth stage is innovation. This is when you start creating something new based on your experience and skills. At this point, you're truly a master. So, coming back to our initial question, is there no such thing as a natural genius? Many would say there are. But why is it that children often follow in their parents' footsteps? The most reasonable explanation for genius is that families provide an environment and culture where children are more likely to develop an interest, find motivation, and continue practicing. This is why skills are often passed down through generations. I have a friend who's a producer, but his older brother is quite remarkable. His brother is the lead violinist for the Central Symphony Orchestra, a well-known musician and now the music director for an entire major theater. His brother has reached the top tier of violin performance internationally. Yet, my friend only reached a level in piano slightly above a high school teacher. Why? Their father, who was also a musician, put everything into training his brother. He would be strict, even to the point of hitting him, until his brother would play while crying, tears rolling down his violin. Eventually, that discipline brought him to an elite level. With my friend, though, his father held back, thinking he was too young and couldn't bear to be as strict. So he practiced casually, and his skills ended up only average. Now, I'm not saying anyone should hit their kids. The point here is that their father was a musician. Almost every outstanding musician has a family with some kind of musical background. This is the best explanation for talent, having an environment that sparks interest and commitment. Take perfect pitch, for instance. It's often thought to be something people are born with, the ability to recognize any note instantly. But research found that after training hundreds of kids, 60–70% could develop perfect pitch. What was once thought to occur in 1 in 10,000 turned out to be something most could achieve through deliberate practice. If we can't hear differences, it's only because we haven't trained ourselves. With enough focused practice, anyone could develop perfect pitch. Some might ask, what about autistic savants? They're amazing at math or art. Isn't that pure talent? It's not. It's because people with autism can focus intensely. Once they enter a certain environment, they become completely absorbed. That's why they often excel in areas like math or drawing. Their skills don't come from divine giftedness, but from extraordinary levels of focus and practice. So, the true meaning of talent is having something that gives you both interest and motivation, a desire to be like the people you admire. You see others in that field, develop an interest, and that's what drives you. That's the biggest takeaway I got from this book. Don't set limits for yourself. Don't assume that's all there is for you, or that you don't have the natural talent for something. The most significant impact of this book is that it opens up a world of possibilities. Imagine if everyone walking down the street could memorize 300 numbers. If everyone could become a chess master. If everyone could dive or practice karate at an advanced level, our world would be incredibly capable. Why hasn't this happened? Because people have written off these skills as something only a select few can achieve. If we incorporate deliberate practice into our work, learning, and daily lives, each of us could become more skilled and accomplished. There's no direct link between intelligence and genius. Sure, scientists may have slightly higher than average IQs because of the field they work in, but within science, Nobel laureates don't necessarily have higher IQs than other scientists. In fact, some are even a bit below average compared to their peers, according to statistics. And chess players generally have IQs that are slightly below the average, though within the normal range. There's no evidence that high intelligence is needed to excel at chess or other skills. That's a misconception. Their expertise comes from deliberate practice and building strong mental representations. I hope this book will inspire everyone, especially the young listeners here today. Your biggest advantage is your youth. Starting now, you have the chance to become the best in any field. And for those of us who are a bit older, let's not confine ourselves to where we are. With time and deliberate training, we can experience real, transformative change. That's the greatest lesson from Peak.